excitingly, depending on how you want to look at it. This is our last meeting of the Primary Care Commissioning Committee. Welcome everybody. We're not live streaming today, but we are recording, and that will be posted up on the website. But before we start, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you all for all your hard work over the last 2 years. It's been an interesting time. Your support for colleagues in primary care certainly needs to be commended, and it feels to me that we leave the system with a strong and effective alliance between the boroughs and the South West London team. And you certainly have a passion for making sure that we make decisions in the best interest of local people. So I wish you all well with the ICS. And without further ado, we'll go through the papers for today. Thank you. Yvonne, I haven't got any apologies, is that right?
That's correct, Susan.
Okay. The declarations of interest were available. Are there any others to add or amend? Anybody wants to highlight? No? Good, thank you. Minutes of the last meeting, they were held on the 16th of March. Are we happy to approve the minutes of the previous meeting? Anybody got any amendments? No, silence is golden, thank you. Okay, then you had the Primary Care Commissioning Committee Chairs report. That was just a report that went to the governing body. If anybody's got any questions on that, that's really just to note. Oh, good. Right, get into the business then. Finance update. Neil, how are you? Welcome. Do you want to give us just a top level summary, and then we'll go into discussion?
Yeah, okay. Thanks, morning all. So yeah, just to hopefully taking the pack as read, but just to point out, so you've got in the pack the 21-22 outturn position, and then we move on to the 22-23 plan. So moving straight to page 19 of the pack, slide 3, we've had some significant additional allocations that have come through primary care in 21-22, particularly in relation to the Winter Access Fund, which was largely spent by the end of the year, which I think, given the challenge that was put our way back in November time, I think, when it came through, that was a huge undertaking, and hopefully we're all seeing, or we all saw the benefits of that money flowing through to each of the boroughs. And there was also the reimbursement for the additional roles reimbursement schemes, which was another large amount of money, I think circa 18 million, which again didn't quite reach the peak, but it was certainly well in excess of the baseline funding that we received. So just to note that we've received the additional allocation from NHS England for those amounts. The position did worsen slightly from what we'd forecast previously, around about 300,000, so up to about 2.5 million. That was mainly because we took a view around the seniority payments where we were asked to accrue for those, so that went through, and also a little bit more of a prudent view around some of the premises and the rent revaluations, which is an ongoing piece of work, but we took the opportunity to make sure that we accrued to the level that we're expecting. The work continues on the underlying position. That's clear from what you can see here, and when I come on to 22-23 in a second, you'll see what the impact of that overall is. And then slide 20 just sets out the overall position, but I think what I've just described there are really what the main headlines are. So perhaps if I stop there on 21-22 just to see whether anybody's got any questions that they wanted to raise.
David, did you want to pick up anything, or have you covered?
No, I'm fine with everything. I mean, we've run through some of this at the finance committee as well, so there wasn't anything in particular. I mean, I guess the main issue for me is the rollover into what is the new financial year now. So I think that's the more important issue now. Yes. As we go. Yeah.
Okay, fine. Bruno, did you want to ask?
Yeah, just two brief questions. What's other medical services in slide 2? And the other question is, are we getting underneath the kind of variation in spend in relation to PCNs?
Yeah, so the other medical services, this is actually where the additional roles reimbursement that was funded at the beginning. To be honest, it should probably be combined with the primary care networks line anyway. It's purely the way that we'd planned for it at the beginning of the year. So what we'd done was we'd expected a level of additional roles reimbursement schemes to come through. So we'd effectively anticipated the allocation, but because we can only report up to the allocation we had, we therefore had to net it off, which is why you've got a negative budget in there. So we won't have that situation going into 22-23 because it's far too complicated to try and explain it, and probably unnecessarily so. And what was the other question, Bruno?
Yeah, are we getting underneath the kind of variation expenditure in relation to primary care networks?
Yeah, so we have had a focus on that. So that's a piece of work that we've looked at, where we've seen certain networks that are definitely over the, well, they've actually asked for more roles than we'd originally budgeted for. I think I will say at this stage it's work that it's being undertaken at the moment, but we've probably got no conclusions or actions at the moment to come out of that, unless anybody on the call knows something different to what I know.
Okay, thank you. Nicola.
Neil, would you just do the ARS in language that Nicola will understand? So thank you. So just in terms of practical terms and how we manage it, because this is an important kind of strategic issue for us in terms of utilising the ARS roles effectively next year. So for the year gone, can you explain what money we got in, how much was spent, and what was left, and then what that money got used for, and then what the plan is for the next year?
So I won't be able to give you all the detail, but I can very quickly follow up afterwards to be a bit more specific on it, because I know we've definitely got it, because I know Mark Smith does this in a great deal of detail for us each month. So in broad terms, I think the baseline spend was something in the order of around £12 million. So we had an allocation at the beginning of the year where they're saying you will at least spend up to that amount. Now it may be a bit more than that, but ultimately you have up to an amount of money that you can spend in year, and it was that we planned on actually achieving, which is, to answer Bruno's original point, was why you've got that negative budget sat in there. So what we've got is every PCM would have had it set out what the expectation is for them to reimburse to those roles. So the bit, and maybe Katie can perhaps explain some of the nuts and bolts of how that actually works. But in financial terms, we set the plan. Once those reimbursements are then claimed for, we then put that through on our return to NHS England, and then they reimburse or give us the allocation in retrospect for those roles. And we didn't quite hit the I think it was around 19 million was the total amount that was available for us, and we got to about 18 million. But Katie hopefully will be a little closer to it than I am.
Just to add to that, Nicola, yeah, so we've spent 17.5 last year on the R's role, 17.5 million. I think our allocation was closer to 18.5 or 19, so I can't remember what the original. So we didn't spend the full amount, but we also, Nicola, I think part of your question was did we have money left? And we only have the 17.5 that was spent, because we're only getting it down based on what was actually claimed. So we've paid almost all of the claims. There are a few queries from last year that we're ironing out with one or two of the boroughs, but basically it's reimbursed on the actuals and then drawn down.
Okay, so the opportunity for that, the remainder of the budget, does not sit in South West London. It never is drawn down.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and just to and so for next year, will that be the same?
So I would expect that what we've done is we've got a plan by PCN for what the expectation is for them. So Katie's nodding. So hopefully that's the case. So it'll be exactly the same process that we're going through.
Yeah, very similar, Nicola. So obviously each PCN should know what their allocation is. And I think we want to do a bit more this year in terms of reporting to PCNs through the year where they are against the plan, because I think we had some underspend, some overspend, etc. We thought, just with lessons learned from last year, it might be nice to provide more reporting to PCNs so they know where they are earlier in the year. And I think that's something, just with the portal process being new last year, maybe we didn't do so much of that. So there's more we could do, but it's a very similar process in terms of claims and then obviously being reimbursed based on the actuals.
Yeah, and just finally, so this is to be done outside of this committee, I think. I think just to flag that the complexities of this scheme are really enormous, and I think it's really important that we support PCNs to be able to, utilise the funding that they have, but recognise the additional problems with it. And so I think we need to do some work in the primary care team to understand what they are and see what can be, what support we can give with that, because it is really complicated. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Julius, did you want to add to that?
Yes, thanks. I mean, I think reflecting back on the experience in Kingston and Richmond, and also I understand some of the other boroughs, your comment about monitoring the spend over the year and having accurate and up-to-date claims, you can't really monitor it without an up-to-date claim process. But there's a well established process within the DES specification for a bidding exercise to allow some unspent ARRS allocations to be swapped between PCNs. And by monitoring this more accurately during the year, it's possible to maximise the spend. In fact, I would say that the spend this year in South West London is pretty high compared with a lot of other areas that I've got experience with, that the gap between the potential total allocation and what's actually been claimed is quite close. I've got PCNs that have only spent a third of their ARRS allocation, and one of the lessons is that if you don't start the exercise early in the financial year and have regular meetings to determine your sort of trajectory, then you can't do it. I mean, obviously there is a personal element in terms of recruitment that you can't plan for, and also your comment about it's a difficult exercise because for some of the people you're recruiting, there's a significant shortfall of potential applicants. That does make the process complicated. But I actually, from an LMC perspective, I think we've done very well in terms of spending the total allocation. And I think the process that we went through, speaking on a borough basis, Kingston and Richmond, I thought that worked really well and enabled PCNs to see where they were going and make plans for, it's important not to have a significant overspend because that sort of compromises your options for the following financial year. But I thought it all points to a good process so far.
Thank you, Julius. Helpful points, Katie. Is that right? Mark, did you want to add anything to that? Or?
It was just to throw into the mix that we have benchmarked ourselves in the ARRS across London, haven't we? And we come out quite favourably in terms of being the patch that has recruited the most additional roles. So I think it's just worth us mentioning that.
Okay, thank you. Right, shall we move on then to the budget plan for this year, 22-23?
Yeah,
thank you.
So I think the takeaway message really is that we've still got the pressures in the area, so therefore the £2.6 million overspend that we've seen at the beginning of the year, that is then built into the budget. So just to be clear, that the CCG and therefore the ICB from July will receive a fixed allocation for primary care services, and that you can see it on slide 5, page 21, where it says initial allocations is the 255 million that we've got available to us. However, when we've done the bottom-up budget setting exercise, which is based on the outturn position, we've got budgets that are in excess of that, which will be 2.6 million. Now, we are, as I've probably said on a number of occasions, we are continuing to work through and understand where some of those pressures are. We think, well, we know where the problems are in terms of premises. That's the main area that we need to focus on, and that will be an ongoing pressure. So there's a challenge there for the organisation actually as a whole to look at how premises is funded going forward, because there are a number of schemes in the pipeline. So that's something that I'm not expecting in the short term that we're going to be able to address. However, what we have done is looked at what's being spent through the delegated budget, and where actually it doesn't fit the criteria, we have moved that back to local primary care where it makes sense. So there's been a couple of areas like that. Now what we need to do is conclude that exercise and make sure that all the funding that's in here is appropriate. It's largely is. I don't think there's anything, there's no material issues in here, but we just need to double check, and maybe little small amounts may add up to, a significant amount that we've got. So work continues on that. I cannot report at the moment to the Primary Care Committee some definitive numbers in terms of where the pressures are being seen, what the definitive actions are therefore going to be in those areas, but we are fully sighted on it. We've built this overspend into the overall CCG plan and therefore the ICB plan, but that obviously will be effectively non-recurrent support because it's coming out of program allocation held elsewhere. The other point to note, which is on the third bullet point on the slide, is around the additional roles reimbursement scheme. So we've put in the baseline allocation that's the 16.8, but we have got a maximum of 27.1 million. So coming back to the conversation we've just had, there needs to be a plan in place for how that 27.1 million can be recruited to, broken down by PCN, and I think taking up the challenge that Julius has given us, which is to perhaps have a process in place that says where we're seeing significant underspends, or indeed overspends maybe for that matter, that we're having those conversations early and some sort of strategy in place to deal with it so that we maximise that benefit for primary care through to the end of the year. So there wasn't probably anything else on the plan that I was going to say, other than it's pretty much more of the same, and we are needing to continue to work on bringing this budget back into balance, which is not easy because most of the spend here is pretty much mandated expenditure. There's not a lot of discretion that we've actually got with it, so it is a really tricky area to try and address. So I'll stop there on that before I just move on to primary care transformation to pick up any questions.
David, did you want to pick up anything about the budget?
I think we need to link that discussion. We need to pick that up as part of in the handover report. I think we need a specific section about finance, because I think there's 2 points. There's the point that Neil's made. I mean, we know the overall budget's tight. We know that. But there's some of these issues we've been living with this on primary care for a couple of years, so it's not as if it's a new problem. So as long as we note down somewhere that there's an issue, then I think we're doing as much as we can do. It needs to be specifically noted in the handover report.
Okay, fine, thanks.
And I think, sorry, just on that, just to say, it hasn't largely got any worse actually over the last 2 years, which I think is worth noting. Doesn't make us feel particularly any better, but at least we know that we're not presided over something that's getting worse. It's actually largely relatively stable, apart from a few bits and pieces.
I mean, my only observation is that if some of the budget lines really are not at our discretion, it's being able to give confidence to the new organisation that what we have spent is effective and good value for money, and we know that primary care is an important area that requires supporting, and that will include investment in order to make it fit for purpose to deliver the new integrated way of working, isn't it? So I suppose from my point of view, as well as highlighting the underlying deficit, is recognising that there's due diligence on each of the areas, that we really understand how that money is currently being spent, and that it adds value to the system, recognising that there's pressures all over the system, isn't there, that we're doing as much as we can to demonstrate that that's what the impact is if you would take the money away. And so you're looking at efficiencies as well as cost effectiveness, but that you're not making it clear in the handover that analysis has been done, and you've done that around the premises. You've done a lot more work on that, but I don't know whether there are any other areas that you would be exploring, because we know that premises is a high demand area now. We're picking up a lot of issues that require more investment and not less, so trying to use that to resolve the underlying deficit, I think, is going to be rather challenging. Nicola, did you want to add in on that?
It was on another issue, actually.
Okay. Julius, did you want to comment on them?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'd like to make an observation rather than a comment. I think the comment was made that things have remained stable and are not getting worse, but actually they are getting worse. And I particularly wanted to reference for the minutes the LMC, both LMC's concerns about the locally commissioned service budgets, which are discretionary spends rather than mandatory required, and we are finding it impossible in discussions to make satisfactory progress in terms of reviewing what's currently commissioned through the locally commissioned service budget, and also addressing some of the areas where not all boroughs have the same locally commissioned services, and therefore the availability of NHS services to the population of South West London is inequitable. Now, the reason we're having difficulty is not because of the discussion with primary care contracting teams. That has been extremely sort of constructive and helpful. The difficulty we're having is identifying a process for funding, and to be completely frank, increasing the funding that is available to support those locally commissioned service budgets. And one of my concerns in moving to the ICS is that the process for identifying that is completely opaque, and we cannot understand how those decisions will be made. I understand the financial pressures, and I accept all parts of the system are under pressure, but from a locally commissioned service point of view, the position is not stable. The position is getting worse because we're not addressing these inequities, and we're not in any way addressing any innovation that's needed in locally commissioned service commissioning arrangements. So both LMCs have significant concerns about this, and we're reaching a point, and I want this to be minuted as well, we're reaching a point where it's likely that some practices will decline to continue some locally commissioned services, either on the basis that the economic sort of balance is no longer appropriate, or because they are undertaking work that should be funded and is funded in some boroughs with locally commissioned services, but in their borough is not funded and they're essentially doing it for free, or because they're completely disenchanted with the process. So I hope, you know, I don't want to I want to make it clear that the discussions we've had with primary care contracting colleagues have been constructive and helpful, but there is a real challenge here in terms of decision making in relation to finances and the allocation of resources and investment into general practice for this particular commissioning arrangement. So I know that this meeting is not going to address all those issues because they're very complicated, but I wanted to make it clear that that's both LMC's perspective, and also I wanted to make sure that in any transfer of information to the ICS, that point is made clear as well.
Okay, thank you for noting that. Neil, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so I think we're mixing up. So this fund here, the delegated fund, is separate from the local commission services that you're referring to. So that's very much a place-based discussion, and I would expect that where it makes sense for local commission services to be commissioned, where it makes sense working with community partners or voluntary sector, wherever it may be, that discussion is had. I'm also aware there's been quite a bit of work done on addressing the issue around the fact that we've got disparity between the boroughs, and therefore maybe Andy can perhaps give an update on where that work has got to. So I think in a way what I would just say is my comments around that things are relatively stable, and I acknowledge that there are some movements, was more in relation to the delegated budget that we're charged with the task of resolving. The place-based primary care, local primary care, is actually subject to effectively the CCG side of the business and not through the delegated committee for the finances. So I just wanted to make that distinction.
And I did make that distinction, if I may add, I made it clear that this is discretionary spend, not the mandatory spend that we're discussing. I think my points are in relation to the decision making. We've done a lot of work in relation to harmonisation, and the LMC has been heavily involved in that. But we are running into a barrier because we can't make, and we see no process for making financial allocation decisions on a place-based basis in the ICS. So thank you for Neil. I wasn't referring to your non-discretionary spend, and I accept your point.
Okay, thank you. Nicola, did you want to add? I take it up a different point.
Well, sort of, but actually very linked, because so I think, you know, Julius's observations are I would agree with them. I observe the same things, I would say, however, Neil, what you're suggesting is that some of this needs to be addressed at the place level. So I think it's actually much more than that, because there's the differences between the locally commissioned services being provided at each place, and the place budgets are such that, you know, they're not large budgets, and also the ability to kind of, you know, move between activities or locally contracted services is relatively limited. And in addition, I think we would be moving to a place where, whilst places, too many uses of the word place, while individual places might have some specific things that they want to commission locally, there is a lot of things that we would want to commission across Southwest London, and therefore asking places to do magic with their place budgets is really not going to be feasible. It's a much bigger issue, and I think you'll know where I'm coming from with this, is that if we've got some new services, so it moves into the innovation area, some new services that we want to move, which is work currently done in another setting, and we want to move it into general practice, or indeed move from any setting to any other setting. What we don't have is the maturity and the ability in our systems currently to do that, and I think that is a huge problem that's going to hold back our innovation very, very significantly. And I've talked about this with some specific examples at SMT, and I'm going to be going to them with a different example every month, because there's so many things in the offing with our very active clinical networks who are coming up with really, really good proposals for how we might manage care, that you know, and that it's no problem working up these proposals and getting people to be involved and agree to them. What you then can't do is there's no way of funding them, and you know, I recognise the kind of, you know, financial picture in the totality, but I'm not talking about additional money. We're talking about moving money around and how we can make that happen. So having said that, I just wanted to ask, if have I missed it on your slides, is prescribing, the primary care prescribing budget in there? Is that come later on?
No, that's a local budget, so that's not part of the delegated budget.
Right. Okay. So it's sort of the same point really about prescribing. So there are some very significant prescribing costs that might need to, with activity where it happens, be shifted from currently acute into primary care, and I can see that coming now, and we need a mechanism for managing that, because again, that can't be managed within the place budget. Actually, I think it's not going to be possible. But so it's just to flag a bit of horizon scanning on that as well.
So in terms of the minutes, obviously this isn't the prescribing and the budgets for the local commissions, not part of our remit, but we need to recognise that those are key risks and issues that we want to note, and to as part of the handover really, and it needs to go to the right forum. Mark, did you want to make any comments on that?
I think Nicola probably stole my thunder. It's just it's on two different levels, isn't it? Because there is a place conversation, but actually there's also the when we're talking about the LCSs, there's Andy might want to just touch on in terms of kind of trying to standardise that across South West London, so there isn't a postcode lottery. You don't get one service in one borough that you don't get in another. And also at a South West London level, we need consistency around the mechanisms to move money around the system. So yeah, it was just to kind of support that really.
So we throw it back to you, Andy. You've got to come up with a plan for that and the new structure.
Comes full circle. I think the reality is it is exceptionally difficult because we're in a position where 6 CCGs did things very, very differently, and therefore you are bound to have inequity and potential inequality. So what we're doing is trying to do one at a time, starting with SMI health checks, where I think we're making really good progress. We've got a couple of other areas. There are still many, many more to go. And as Julia says, there are, and Nicola as well, quite rightly, there are other new avenues of work, the innovation area, where we need to try and work with, as well, anyway, Neil and his other colleagues across the ICS. And if the ICS and the ICB is obviously going to do its kind of deliver on its remit, then these kind of issues should be easier to sort out in the new world than in the old world. So it really should be about how do we move resources around and try and kind of come up with the innovation approaches that way to fund it properly in general practice. So it's very difficult. I think that's all we'll say. I know we're making a start, as Julius has mentioned, about the existing internal LCS budgets that we have and trying to get harmony and harmonisation for those patients with serious mental issues around getting them checked every year in general practice. And then I think we will work on 2 or 3 other areas over the course of the next 12 months, but it will be a rolling cycle. This will be a kind of a conversation that never ends. But whilst we're doing our own internal place-based approach, there is absolutely the need to kind of look at what's the ICS, the partnership wanting to do in terms of more innovation and what does that mean for general practice and making sure the funding flows so that the whole pathway starting in general practice can be appropriately resourced.
I think the point for me is that this isn't the right place for that conversation, but just making sure that there is a place where those conversations are able to take place in the new structure, really. Okay, I'm going to close that. Is there anything else you wanted to mention on primary care transformation then, Neil?
Nothing really, other than to know that was the primary care transformation budgets from 21-22, and we've got primary care transformation budgets for 22-23, and no doubt I expect that the team will be working with primary care as to how they use that. So when we talk about the innovation, there's your place. Okay,
thank you. Right, I'm going to close that item unless anybody's got any other burning points, but thank you very much, Neil. Interesting discussion. It sort of leads on to the next item, which is the handover process. We started to highlight some areas that need to be picked up. I don't know who is it, Jay or you?
It's me, Susan. Yeah, it's Jay. So shall I just jump straight into it? It seems out of date already.
Okay, just give us the overview and then people got comments to make, then that'll be helpful.
But Jay, shall I just introduce you and then you can come in, yeah? So just as I'm sure everyone knows, the end of the CCG is coming to an end on the 30th of June. And as part of the transition to the new ICS, in terms of due diligence and the governance oversight, we have to ensure that the functions carried out by the Primary Care Commissioning Committee, we know where they're going and where they sit in the future. And as such, we are developing a kind of handover document for each of our committee structures. So Jay, if you then want to go into actually what does that mean for the Primary Care Commissioning Committee, off you go.
Sure, thanks, Mark. So yeah, each committee of the governing body, of the current governing body, is asked to agree a handover report so that it can hand over the current issues and any particular high-level risks that it may want to hand over to the incumbent committees. With regard to the Primary Care Commissioning Committee, the incumbent group is going to be a primary care contracting group in the new ICB. It's going to be slightly different in the sense that the legislation didn't mandate a Primary Care Commissioning Committee in its current guise for the new world, but the organisation recognises the importance of having those conversations, and the contracting group has been I guess established, or is being established, to consider those issues going forward on a quarterly basis. And underneath that, there will be a slight tweak to the primary PCMGs. I just talk in acronyms sometimes. And so the operational groups at place level will focus on those delegated arrangements. The handover report currently focuses on the governance arrangements more than any other gaps. But what I will do is I'll include the particular risk and issues to do with the financial implications. The new arrangements will have a line in to the finance committee, to the finance and performance committee in the new ICB, and that finance committee will meet on a monthly basis. So any financial implications impacting on primary care, I think that will go to the new finance committee. And any other issues that are identified in this meeting will be captured as well. Committees has to agree the report, but given the fact that it is likely to change after this meeting, I think I will update it and circulate it to the group to agree rather than ask the group to agree now. It will be presented to the first meeting of the new committee along with the minutes of this meeting. And what I would say, it's not intended to capture all the legacy kind of conversations and issues. We will still have access to those minutes and papers that we had in the CCG. So it's not like it's a whole new chapter. It's just to capture the main highlights and main issues, I would suggest.
Okay, thank you, Jake. Can I just clarify then? So from my point of view, what we're talking about is the delegated budget and the delegated responsibilities that we have, and not, as we've just had a discussion about, the wider role that primary care plays in terms of locally commissioned services and networks and things like that. That's what we're talking about, the tactical elements of our primary care contracting arrangements. However, there are issues within that, aren't there, so I'm just trying to understand where the wider primary care handover takes place. So the fact that we've discussed a whole range of issues around locally commissioned services and transformation, things which aren't necessarily, we've heard about, but not necessarily going forward into that contracting group, how they might be planned. So in terms of giving us any further information, it would be just useful to see how that map is working. So where are the NMC things going? So even if we don't discuss it today, that is shared amongst people, because there are people here that are going to be part and players within the new ICS, and it would be useful for them to know how that is going to operate. And also I think there are some things that relate to the contracting process that perhaps need to be considered a bit more. So we've talked a bit about the finance bit, but in terms of whether there will be any conflicts of interest management issues to be addressed within the contracting framework and how they'll be handled, how the patient voice will feed into the contracting process, or does that just, how do we hear about those issues and get that feedback? And in terms of the risk register, how, because we started to develop a risk register, and what does that look like? And though you're identifying some of the risks, who will take responsibility for the primary care risk register from a corporate point of view? So that I've got some things, but I mean, obviously they're not necessarily things you could necessarily answer today, but I'm sure there are others. So if we try and pick up people's observations, feed them to you, and then perhaps you can reflect on those and then in the new version come back to us, that would be helpful. David, did you want to make some points?
Yeah, it's on a similar theme, Susan, because there's a lot of stuff that needs to be sorted, and where it goes in the future and how it's dealt with, that's up to the new group. So it's not our job, because we won't, some of us won't be around. But I do think it's important that we note these issues down in the highlight report, and that's what I think these reports are doing. So the stuff that we've dealt with around primary care performance issues, it's an issue that needs to be dealt with, so it needs to be noted down. That's one. The other big one for me that I think is missing, it's all the stuff around primary care estate and the developments, and where again we've talked about, we know there are some big schemes, but there's a lot of primary care estate stuff where we've signed off either through this committee or through the finance committee, where there are future commitments going forward. So again, how those are handled in the future, it doesn't bother me. Noting down that there is an issue that's got to be dealt with does, and I think I would want those to be noted in this report. Otherwise, it's only a partial report as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, thank you. Bruno, and then John.
Yeah, picking up slightly on what Susan was saying, but I mean, there will be a split of responsibilities between place and system level, but there's been business done by the Primary Care Commissioning Committee which justifies and warrants it having its meetings in public. And I think there are reputational risks if there's business which has formally been covered by the Primary Care Commissioning Committee goes to places where there aren't meetings in public, because if the public are learning about things late and not being able to get involved in developments. I think there are significant risks around that. So I think that where the business of the Primary Care Commissioning Committee has been significant and would potentially create reputational risks in the long term, I think that needs to land in places in the ICS where the meetings are in public and they're timely too, because we know very little about what's going to happen at place level and whether or not those meetings will be in public. And for some things, it may be more appropriate that they're covered at that level and they are in public, but we just don't know that. And I think we just need to identify the risk going forward.
Okay, I'm going to ask John and then I'll come to you, Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Susan. In a sense, I want to reflect what Bruno's just said in a slightly different way. The report, the handover report, which in many respects is very useful, doesn't cover PPE as an issue specifically at all. And there's a couple of things I wanted to reflect on there. There's still a lack of clarity about where Healthwatch will fit into the new primary care management structures. Some of that discussion is taking place locally, but we will be disappearing from both this level and the PCMG level. And we are, as I said, we're not clear yet exactly how we will fit into the place arrangements. And also, we agree very much with the point Bruno's just made that this meeting does meet in public, and not having the PCCG meet in public for perhaps good reasons, nevertheless seems to cut down on the opportunities for public engagement, which is a bit disappointing, I guess. If I may, there's a more detailed point in the report in priority number 3 about the whole issue of online working. There's a reference to rollout of online consultation in 22-23, which we don't recall having been discussed in the CESG or anywhere else. I don't know whether there may be something to be said about that. Perhaps in another place, but I just want to flag it up as an issue.
Okay, Andrew, do you want to pick up some of those points?
So I think Asia had a hand up as well. Actually, I don't know. Is it down now, Asia?
Oh right, I couldn't see that. Sorry, I only see yours.
Sorry, I'll talk first. Right. I completely acknowledge everything that's been said, and certainly the comments from John and Bruno as well. I think what we're trying to do is to have a primary care contracting group that does what it needs to do, which is in essence transact the 450-page operating manual from NHS England about the kind of the nuts and bolts of GP core contracts, really. So that's the focus, that's the remit of the core contracting group. There isn't a requirement for it to meet in public. I think these meetings have been in public for the last few years because of CCGs being membership organisations, which of course goes away from the 1st July as an ICS. I think what we need to get right though really is get the patient input at the right time at the right stage, and that is very much specific, and that's very much laid out in various processes by NHS England around, branch closures, practices making significant changes. So what we really need to do is to make sure that we get that patient voice at the level that we need it, which is at a really, really local level, because at this level, the primary care commissioning group or contracting group, it's almost at the end of the process really, which is not necessarily the right time for the patient engagement. It really needs to come early on. So what we are trying to do and what we will be doing through the primary care contracting group is making sure that where that patient voice very much needs to be heard on an individual case-by-case basis, it is absolutely there and it is done properly. And then obviously it will feed in through the finance planning committee and then up to the integrated care board. And then the other point that's been made by colleagues around the wider issues, so the transformation, so the LCS type discussions. So we will have a primary care transformation board. I think there's still conversations about where that sort of sits in the ICB, and I think the plan is in the ICS. I think the plan is that will probably report into the ICB. So very high profile, and that's where we'll be talking all about online consultations. And I will take away that specific point, John and Bruno, actually just on that report. But that's where we're talking about what are we doing that kind of change things for all the patients rather than just sort of practice by practice, really. So we're trying to make sure that the primary care contracting group is very much focused just on the nuts and bolts of the pay and rations, if you like. And all the assurance that the ICB needs around that, and then separately the transformation group will do all of the fun transforming stuff, the innovative work. And then we're going to have a chat later on in part 2 around estates, because we recognise that's an issue that we're trying to put a proper process behind as we go forward as well.
Mark, did you want to add to that?
I suppose it's just with my other hat on from a kind of local perspective, and just to say that in terms of our borough committees, certainly for Merton and Wandsworth, we have Health Watch are part and parcel of that borough committee, and each of those borough committees will have a PPI subgroup of some sort that feeds into there, and it's a two-way conversation, really, isn't it? So there's something about, I think, some of the that the place structures, once they're established across all six, really should kind of respond to Bruno and John's comments about Health Watch and PPI. I do think there's two things. I think there's one about the handover document, which is about where do the functions sit, and then there's something about the risks that we all hold in primary care and where they then get kind of delegated up to. So if we look at the finance, you know, Neil, correct me if I'm wrong, the finance committee will absolutely acknowledge the primary care pressures, the primary care spends, etc. And so it's just being really clear where the risk log, I think, then gets taken and gets acted upon. So I think we just need to make sure that we're separating function from risk.
Well, can I just clarify then, are you saying that David's point about the financial risks, that is already flagged up in the transfer document, handover document from the finance committee, and so therefore you're saying you don't need to put it into this one? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, so you know, I don't think it's about. I don't think it needs to be either or. I mean, it's absolutely, you can put whatever you want into a handover document. So if we want to say actually these are the main risks, and we are, as a departing primary care commissioning committee, we want to acknowledge that these are the risks that we have been dealing with over the last time, and it kind of signals we need to make sure that they're located into the new governance structures somewhere. So I don't think it's either or, but I would say that the finance committee will also have the primary care overspend risk as part of its handover to the new finance committee, surely.
So going back to this document, in terms of the handover document, we're concentrating on the contracting elements and not on what the future looks like. So can we make sure then that we've got an element around estate issues that sort of linked to the finance issues and the vulnerable practices that we have had to manage in terms of the risks in this committee? I don't know whether they're not that explicit with it. They may be hidden in that, but they weren't something that was overt. And that presumably then in terms of the public voice and the accountability bit, we recognise that we're not moving forward into a membership organisation, which is why this structure has arisen for us, is because it's a membership structure. We've had to do this in the public domain, but we're moving to one where it isn't a membership structure, so it doesn't have to be. Some advice really on terms of describing what you've said, Andrew, about the accountability to the public, the voice of the public, and how that will be recognised. That would be useful as a separate issue, perhaps not as part of this document, but separately. Is that the points that you made, David, covered? Seem to have frozen on the photo.
No, that's fine, Susan. Yeah, as long, and I agree with Mark, you know, as long as, you know, we noted them somewhere, put them in a risk register or wherever, let's do that. We haven't done the finance committee report yet because we're not meeting until next week, I think. So, but we probably won't pick up the level of detail. So if there's more detail, then it needs to be in this report. Yeah.
Fine, thank you. So in terms of the next steps, taking on board those particular areas, Jay, you're going to go away and work with the team in terms of reframing that and circulate it back to us.
And I'll circulate it by email to Susan and members of the group, just to get their agreement, and just to kind of add, just as a final point, the players committee, which Mark referred to, those will report to the ICP board as well. So there will be forums where the PPE voice will have to be heard and engaged with, and they just might be a bit more disparate in terms of capturing that engagement, but it will get funneled up to the board in some form. Okay, fine. So we're not signing it off, a few more additional bits, but we'll sign it off virtually if that's what's required before the fortnight's over. Okay, thank you very much, Jay. Right, so the next item, Sean, are you on the call? Yes, excellent. You're going to give us an
lead on the item on Grove Road, an update, is that right?
I am, yes. So people may recall that at the last meeting we had there was a request from Grove Road Surgery in Sutton to close their list to new registrations. This was because they'd seen a significant amount of growth and an unusual level of growth particularly over the past year. And they wanted some time to make some changes to their premises in order to accommodate those patients better, and that was approved. However, in early May, the practice came back to the primary care management group and said that they had managed to find a solution to create some additional clinical space within the existing premises, and actually wanted to withdraw that request to close their list. Fortunately, the list closure hadn't actually taken effect at that point. It was planned for, I think, the middle of May. Can't remember. I think the middle of May was the date that we'd planned for. So the primary care management group were happy to recommend that, but it needs to come back to this committee just to ratify that decision. So Grove Road's list would remain open.
So what you're saying, it hasn't had any impact on patients yet because the list was never closed, and
Yeah.
you're confident that they have the longer term capacity and it's not going to be coming back in a few weeks' time to.
Yeah, I would say they have medium-term capacity, and they are continuing to look for alternative premises because they are cramped within their existing building. But they have, as I said, they have created some additional clinical space within the building in order to, and feel that they've now got growth for up to 11,000 patients. They're currently at sort of 10,200.
Okay, fine. Anybody else got any questions for Sian? Are we happy to ratify the decision of the Sutton Primary Care Management Group? Okay, fine. Thank you very much, Sian.
Thank you.
We've now got the borough management reports. Could we just go to the remedial notices first, and then we'll come back to the borough reports, if that's all right? Paul, are you on the call? I think you were going to.
Hi there.
Sorry. Just thought it would be useful to get the sort of business bits over, and then we've got time for some discussion with the boroughs.
Sure.
So you want to pick up the 2 remedial notices for?
Yes, so first of all, we have Cheam GP Centre. So the committee has asked to ratify the lifting of the practice's second remedial notice, with agreement that we will continue to offer support to the practice just to ensure that improvements are sustained. The PCMG met on the 3rd of May and approved the recommendation. The practice was issued a second remedial notice following CQC inspection in April 2021, and the report was published in June of 21, and where they were rated overall requires improvement. They were re-inspected again in February and rated overall good, but requires improvement for services being responsive to people's needs domain. This was due to improvements required with the telephone system, which they are working with. They have been working with the CCG to address. So as you see, the paper provides some background on the practice and the previous ratings and the timeline of events. One of the issues identified by the CQC was a lack of cohesive working between the partners. This was following a merger of the 3 practices when they co-located. They were co-located at the same practice at the same premises. The 3 practices merged back in April 2018. However, we have seen significant improvements now with the way that the practices are working together. The Sutton team had also established a task and finish group to help the practice make the required improvements. However, the practice is trying to recruit a full-time practice manager at the moment, hence a sort of reason for recommendation for continuing to offer support to the practice, just to monitor them and provide any support that they need in sustaining those improvements. So that's the key bits there. So as I said, the committee has just asked to ratify the group's decision to lift the remedial notice.
So I was going to ask in terms of what was different now, but I think you've described that they've got greater capacity and they've addressed some of their sort of operational systems. But you know, 2 remedial notices doesn't bode well. So it's being confident that they've got the sustainability to carry on, and that if they were to happen again, whether we would be on the case quick enough really to help support them. Really, David, did you want to make any comments on it? Okay, so we're happy to ratify that decision. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And the second practice is Tooting South Medical Centre. So again, the committee has asked to ratify the lifting of the practice's remedial notice. Again, we would continue to offer support to the practice to ensure that improvements are sustained. The Primary Care Management Group met on the 18th of May and approved the recommendation. The CQC re-inspected in February and the practice was rated overall good. Again, some background of the practice has been provided with details of their the last 2 inspections where they've been rated overall requires improvement. Some of the common themes from the from those 2 inspections are provided in the paper. So they're around sort of things like staff training, risk management, patient access, and clinical review. Following the recent inspection, as I say, they were rated overall good and good for all domains. However, again, due to the history with this practice, we would want to continue to offer support just to ensure that improvements are sustained. And again, the committee are just asked to ratify the group's decision.
Okay, and presumably the practices in each patch are put on some sort of risk register so that you can identify which ones are more vulnerable than others. And even if it's got a good, you're saying that this one's still going to get some support moving forward.
I think for consistency as well, we're providing similar assistance to Team GP practice, and with Tooting South, as they've had, it's not been their first remedial note or first CQC report where they've been rated overall requires improvement. The recommendation there would be to continue to offer some kind of support if they should they need this.
Great. Mark, did you want to say something?
I suppose there's 2 things. I mean, firstly, I think one of the questions we sometimes get is, actually, does the support that we offer make any difference? And so therefore, when we've got some practices that are actually having their remedial notices lifted, we should acknowledge that. And that's partly the practice, but also partly the support that we've offered. So I think we do need to kind of make sure that people are aware that actually we do have an impact and practices do improve. And then secondly, it's that after support question, really, and that's not one that we can go into now, but I think it will be quite important just to acknowledge that we don't want practices to slip back into requires improvement. So the level of that ongoing support when you've got a lot of other things to happen might be quite challenging sometimes.
Okay, that's a helpful point. Yes, Nicola.
Just a thought really about the amount of support that we put in when practices have had an adverse result from CQC inspection, as to whether or not we might consider, and this is just sort of an operational thing, but I think it might be worth thinking about, to send in a hit squad when we know there's a CQC inspection coming to support practices with some obvious things that we know about CQC inspections, because we see and experience all of them, that we might be able to just help with, because sometimes there's some just organizational things that get in the way and people aren't aware of, and I just wondered whether we should consider not just the after support, actually the before support. Of course, supporting practices on an ongoing basis all the time is important, but there might be something bespoke that we could think about. I don't know, just a thought.
Thank you. Julius, did you want to comment?
I think that is in place in some boroughs, Nicola. I know from experience that in both Kingston and Richmond, there is support available in anticipation of CQC inspections, and also the LMC does offer support both specifically for practices, but also in general terms, in terms of preparing for CQC inspections. We have training modules which are designed for that. Obviously not quite sure what might be available in MSW, but I know that London-wide LMC has had preparation for CQC inspection training courses as well, because we've been able to hitchhike and borrow some of those. So I think there is some support available. I think Mark's point about, you know, what support is offered afterwards, I think he was saying politely that sometimes people can be a bit cynical about that. And I think I would like to say that it's clear that in some cases the support that I've seen offered by boroughs to practices in these circumstances has been very helpful. So it is helpful when you see these notices rescinded. So I think on the whole, there is a programme of support. I think one of the challenges is the way that CQC undertakes their inspections, which I think Jay will probably agree with me is outside the scope of this committee.
Thank you. Okay, so we're happy to ratify Wandsworth's decision. Yes, good, thank you very much. South Norwood Hill Medical Centre, who's doing that? Kathy?
I'm doing that actually.
Oh, you're not Kathy, you're Joe, right? Okay.
Yeah, I'm Joe. Hi, I'm being Kathy for today. Yes, so South Norwood Hill remedial notice. Yes, so we're asking you to ratify the Croydon PCMG's decision to issue a remedial notice to this practice. It's actually a practice that's had problems for quite a long time. So you'll see in the paper that they have been rated as overall requires improvement before, they're now rated overall as inadequate. And they've also gone down from requires improvement to inadequate, the effective domain and the well-led domain. And actually quite a lot of the issues they're having now are similar to what they've had before. So as well as issuing a remedial notice, we also want to issue a formal notification that they haven't remedied the issues that we previously stated in the remedial notice. So that's kind of a bit of a further step for this practice. So they're rated as inadequate because for various reasons. So not completing comprehensive recruitment checks, not addressing risks associated with Legionella, and there's lots of issues to do with their risk management. So to do with not arranging management of medicines and safety alerts properly, and also organising their clinical records in a way that might mean they miss certain issues that are often undiagnosed for patients. So they clearly have breached the contracts. They've breached 6 clauses in their PMS contracts. So yeah, we're asking the committee to ratify the decision, and also we will be, as I said, notifying them that they haven't remedied the previous notice, which is already in place. And just in terms of the support that's been provided to the practice to improve, I know that Helen Goodrum from the borough team has been in touch with the practice and has met with them. There's actually quite a lot of support that's been provided to them, including help from Anne Cox, who can help them prepare for the next CQC visit. And they've said that they've already started to work on a lot of the issues that have been raised as well. So hopefully there will be improvements. But you know, I think in the past they've said that they'll do this stuff before, and it hasn't led to improvements. So we just need to see what happens.
So we've heard about these sorts of cases before. Andrew, have you got any observations in terms of how we handle situations that oscillate between trying to make improvement and then failing again? And did you say that there requires improvement or in? Or
so they're now inadequate. They were
inadequate. So yeah. Presumably CQC are playing a key part in monitoring regularly. Then are they? The improvements are there.
They'll be going back again within 6 months of the last visit. So the last visit was May, so it'll be before the end of the year when they go back again. And you know, the CQC does step up their enforcement action, like again reasonably slowly, but they do that. So I mean, if the problems continue, the CQC will be eventually taking action.
Okay, fine. Andrew, anything?
Yeah, I mean, from the wider comments, Susan. So I think pretty much all of the boroughs do have quite a lot of intense support, and certainly when a practice has remedial notice, there's a lot of conversations. Sometimes it's a shock, sometimes it perhaps isn't. And I suppose there is a question mark about how many times can you go around the loop, really. and the team do work very, very closely with the CQC, particularly where we think there's areas to sort of be explored further as well. So there are, from a contractual perspective, there are very, very few grounds to actually sort of do anything to terminate contract wise. And likewise, CQC, their bar is exceptionally high as well. But what we often do is work with the partners, because often it is known issues and historically known issues, and sometimes only one way to go really. And what we try and do, and what we've done on a number of occasions, is sort of support takeovers or mergers from other practices. Because what we really don't want to do is have to not necessarily disperse a list, but re-procure another provider. What we want to do is trying to make sure that that whole local population get what they need. And sometimes the best approach is to work with other practices. And I know we've seen that on 5 or 6 occasions in the last 2 or 3 years. So that's probably more the lines we would actually go down if we felt that support was only getting so far. And that usually is a bit of a mutual conversation we have with that practice and other practice as well, because the bar around termination is exceptionally high. But obviously we have done it recently with the village surgery as well in Kingston, as you know.
Okay, fine. So obviously, presumably everybody's happy that we ratify the decision, and it was just helpful to have some assurance about the level of input and scrutiny that's going on to support their improvement. Thank you. Okay, right, we'll go back to the borough reports. Do you want to, are you going to do the borough report, Joe, or is Aisha doing the Croydon? Who's doing Croydon?
Hi, it would be me.
Excellent, good, thank you. So I mean, we've all had the borough reports, really helpful to get an overview of the management group's work. Just really to bring our attention and talk about any sort of key issues that you want to bring to our attention, but also perhaps some of the preparations of the changes moving forward, if you're able to, and what that feels like for you in each of the boroughs. That'll be helpful.
Thank you. So in terms of the summary report, it reflects the last 2 primary care management group meetings that we have. So we had a number of discussions on contracts and remedial breach notices and quality in the borough, and what we're doing to support practices with improvement, which is reflected in the paper. There's also some stuff around estates, which we're picking up in part 2 as well, so I won't regurgitate any of that. But we did have quite a detailed discussion around governance and how it will look for Croydon going forward. So the decision that we've made is that we'll have obviously the primary care operational group for the delegated commissioning functions, and specifically around contracting. So that will be aligned with South West London. We'll still have a primary care quality working group, which will now feed into our place-based quality meeting. So that will be a quality meeting which reflects all of Croydon Place. And in terms of the transformation programmes, we have an existing forum which we call the Localities Board. And that has all of the system partners around the table, and we will be taking primary care transformation items to the locality meeting, and we're going to invite all of our PCN CDs to that forum. So rather than creating another meeting, we're going to change some of the terms of reference for that meeting to make it more broader in scope and to be able to make decisions on transformation from a Croydon Place perspective. So that was agreed by Primary Care Management Group, and I've taken it through various other governance routes as well, where it's been positively received.
Thank you very much. Good. We'll go through all of them and then we'll take questions at the end, if that's all right. Ahmed, are you doing the Kingston Richmond?
Hi, Susan. Yeah, that's me. Yes, no problems. So hopefully you've had a chance to read over the reports. We had a couple of contract variations where we had partners retiring. We discussed issues around the locally commissioned services for 22-23. If you remember back to the last PCC, we talked about the piece of work we're doing around rolling those over, and then some of the kind of detailed review that we're going to be doing across the course of the year. So we discussed that at Primary Care Management Group 2, as it was instructed by Primary Care Committee. Our usual item on primary care quality, where we looked over a number of matrix and discussed the different aspects with the group. And then under our sort of any other business transformation items, we had a presentation from our training hubs with regards to the work they're doing around workforce, specifically around placements and the work around ours that we touched on previously. We supported a small value business case for a care navigation pilot that we have been working on for some time in the borough. So that was approved and that has been deployed now and has started to work, and early feedback looks very successful from it. And we had an update from the Kingston team around personalisation and social prescribing as well. With regards to our meeting and governance going forward, I think we may have operated slightly differently to the other borough teams over the course of the last 2 years. At our primary care management group, we actually carried out 3 functions. It was the delegated contracting elements. We talked about quality in that group as well, and also transformation. So we had a sort of one-stop shop for all those different elements. Moving forward, we'll be following the very same model for primary care operational group for the delegated and contracting functions, and we are discussing possible options around a primary care transformation group, or joining it to an equivalent type of meeting that is place-based. The place-based governance is currently emerging, so we're waiting to see from our local exec to see how that best fits in. We want to ensure we don't duplicate, and we want to make sure we've got the right people around the table. So if we don't align it to our local transformation meeting or one of our partnership meetings, we will set up a dedicated primary care transformation group to carry out those functions that have been discussed. And then separately, we do have a place-based quality group that has all system partners around it. We're probably going to put in place a new quality surveillance meeting at a primary care level that will report into that quality meeting at a place level, but also through to the QSG at South West London. So I think we're pretty much there on PCOG and pretty much there on quality. We just need to bottom out what's emerging around the local governance, around the transformation group, and then we'll lock one of those in probably over the course of the next month.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, shall we go on to who have I got next? Sian Sutton.
Hello. Yeah, so I was just going to draw people's attention that Hackbridge's new medical centre opened this week. So I know, Susan's, it's been a long time coming. So they have moved into their new premises, which is really great news. We also have South Sutton, so the Belmont branch of Ben Hill and Belmont practice, and they are due to move into their new premises on the 1st of August. So yeah, really good news actually to have those new purpose-built premises opening at long last. So we have had the discussions around governance going forward. We will continue with our sort of single meeting. So our primary care operational group will cover off the contracting part, but we're also going to keep the transformation discussions within that group as well, as we do currently, just have those wider conversations about primary care, with a particular focus on the development of PCNs and delivery of network DES services, but also other borough transformation schemes as well. That will report through to the Borough Transformation and Delivery Group to ensure borough-wide oversight of primary care transformation, and also ensure that primary care is working effectively with providers to deliver the agreed priorities for the borough as identified through the Sutton Health and Care Plan. We'll continue with our quality group as we do currently. Interesting with the discussions earlier around CQC remedial notices, we do recognise that it's no good as really just being reactive to poor CQC inspections, that we need to go back to being much more proactive as we were pre-pandemic, but have probably been a little less proactive over the last couple of years. We are currently running a quality improvement scheme quality improvement programme that all our practices are attending to give them some sort of formal skills in quality improvement techniques, and that's been really well attended, and and some really good conversations taking place across our practices. So really trying to upskill our practice teams to be doing the quality improvement work themselves, but obviously, you know, we will be supporting them around that as well. Yeah, that's it. You're muted, Susan.
The first time I mute myself, I forget to take it off. Katie, do you want to cover Merton and Wandsworth? That'd be great.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So as per the other boroughs, Merton and Wandsworth have also had a focus on primary care governance as we move forward into the ICS and what that's going to look like. So the expectation is that each of our boroughs will have a primary care ops group, which will do the nuts and bolts of the delegated commissioning stuff. And that group will operate alongside a primary care board or primary care programme board, which will do the transformation agenda. The intention for those groups is that we bring our clinical directors and our federation colleagues around the table together with our management team and with our new clinical leads that are going to be working on behalf of the ICS, because actually we really recognise that primary care transformation is the stuff that happens in PCNs and in practices. So we really need them to be at the heart of those conversations in order to make things happen. At the moment, we're proposing that the quality agenda will sit under our primary care ops group. That's different to how we've been operating over the last couple of years, where we've had a joint approach across Merton and Wandsworth when it comes to primary care quality. The primary care ops group will have the responsibility for quality as a whole, but what we're anticipating is that some of the more strategic conversations around performance, so for example, cervical screening uptake or childhood IMS, would be something that we'd actually take into our primary care board meetings, so that we actually have our clinical directors and our federations round the table, and they're probably the people who can actually start to influence these conversations beyond what we've done previously. So we think that's going to make a bit of a difference actually in a really positive way. In terms of the wider reports, I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that we've started a process to refresh our local indicators for our PMS contract in Merton. That's progressing quite well. We're kind of doing the quick wins first, and then we're going to move on to some of the more challenging areas afterwards. And in Wandsworth, estates has been particularly high on the agenda. So specifically, we've been focusing on identifying a primary care provider to move into the new Sleaford Street Health Centre, which is going to be open on the Nine Elms Vauxhall estate in 2024, and that's progressing really well as well. We've also had quite a lot of conversation in Wandsworth around CQC recently, so we've had a number of inspections over the last month actually, and we're waiting for initial feedback on those. And as we've already talked about, we've had some positive feedback on Tooting South Medical Centre as well, in that they've been rated good now, and we're looking to lift their remedial notice. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. One thing I meant to ask Omid, we mentioned, Andy mentioned earlier about the village surgery. Is there anything that you want to update us on in terms of progress being made in that area?
Yeah, sure. So I think since we last spoke, we have now identified a caretaker, and the caretaker is now operating and supporting the team at the practice to deliver services since the registration for the CQC registration was terminated by CQC and the partners couldn't deliver those services. We're now looking at next steps around that practice list, and we'll shortly be writing out to stakeholders and patients with regards to the plans and the long-term plans for the practice.
Okay, thank you. Has anybody got any questions for any of the borough leads? No, it's been really helpful having those reports, getting some insight into the sort of local agendas, and also, you know, hearing about how some of the bigger transformation issues are being taken forward locally. Bruno, you wanted to ask a question?
Yeah, I do have a question. It's not clear about the extent to which things which happen around the transformation agenda will be noticeable or achieve like transparency to people at place level, because yes, there's a governance structure and people are working on those governance structures, but it's not clear about the extent to which they will actually achieve some kind of public profile around this kind of work, because it's not clear whether these meetings will be closed meetings or what the kind of lags and delays between reporting back between committees will be. So I'm curious about that. How will transparency be achieved in terms of those kind of things, the transformation agenda and other kind of big ticket issues?
Nicola, are you picking up a different point, or are you?
Yeah, different point.
Okay, well, I mean, I don't know whether we've got the answers to those today, but maybe that's an important point, Bruno, that we just need to play back, unless Katie wants to add anything.
I can just reflect some of the conversation that we're having in Merton and Wandsworth. So we're working up our patient and public involvement structures at the moment. What we're expecting is that we will have a PPI subgroup of the borough committee, and in the way that we currently do, we would absolutely be expected to bring key items that we're looking to roll out or that we're looking to evolve through that group as and when required. So at the moment we have a rolling programme through our PPI reference group of updates from different teams within the local boroughs, and we'd absolutely anticipate that we'd continue to take that approach to making sure that that group is aware of what's happening. Okay, thank you. And there may be others that probably need to feed into that, Bruno, but yeah. I'm not saying you're going to get a definitive response that meets all your...
No, I'm not expecting a definitive response, but that's still a rather closed loop, because I presume that those are effectively stakeholder groups, but broader stakeholder groups. So that, for me, is not actually achieving public transparency around things necessarily. I mean, I don't know how it can be worked at local levels, but I think that there is a need to recognise that transformation of primary care is something which does need to in effect, work with public consent to some extent.
Okay, fine. John, is that on the same point that you want to?
It is. I just want to reinforce what I said earlier, that I know Omid will have heard this already. I mean, I want to acknowledge that we are in contact with Omid and with Nick Grundy to talk more about the local arrangements, specifically in Richmond. I heard what Omid said just now, so I look forward to further clarity on that. I was also going to raise the village practice, but Omid has covered that. It was just, Omid, it was an omission in the PCNG report, which you've effectively covered. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Mark, were you covering the same issues, or should I go on to Nicola?
I suppose it's just to support what Katie was saying about kind of local review, because actually what we don't want to do locally is throw the baby out with the bathwater just because we're moving into something called an ICS. What we want to make sure is that the forums and the contacts and the patient involvement that we've got, such as we have in primary care, that we build on that really, and that we make sense and make sure that we are including that in this kind of review. I don't think, certainly from Merton and Wandsworth, we're just at the point where we're having those conversations. We've had a couple of think tanks around how we do this going forward. I don't know about the other boroughs, but I just wanted to kind of put that into the mix, really.
Okay. Nicola, sorry.
Yeah, it was just my question in the chat, actually. I just put it in to give people a chance to think about it. Julius has answered a bit, but just about the PMS indicator work, because Merton was the only borough that specifically mentioned it, but all boroughs who have PMS practices will need to establish what the arrangements are for the indicators for this year. And if silence indicates that's not currently on the agenda at the moment, then I think it needs to be reported into our the future arrangements need to address this in the next after 1st of July.
Okay, thank you. Right, unless anybody's got any comments on those, I think we've come to the end of the agendaed items for this meeting. I don't believe we've got any public questions, but is there any other business, John?
Yes, thanks, Sue. There was some mention in the Croydon report about a number of practices requiring improvement. I wanted to use that as a context for raising some concerns Healthwatch has got in relation to the recent BBC Panorama programme about operos and the way some of those practices appear to be operating. So I've got sort of 5 points, if I can raise them. One is, what do we know about what does South West London know about the level of use of physicians assistants or associates, and whether that's high or lower than might be expected. We wonder about the processes that will be in place to check and monitor the way in which physicians associates are used, and whether they are actually in relation to the allegation in the programme receiving the kind of supervision that they appear to need. Would patients know that they are being seen by a physician's associate rather than a doctor, and how would that be communicated? And then there are issues too about the way in which the physician's assistants are or aren't properly handling letters, test results and reports from, say, secondary care and so on back into primary care, and how these are being handled, and whether therefore patients are getting the right level of care. And I guess an overall question about whether there needs to be arrangements in place to specifically measure the quality of service in those kinds of those managed practices. That's it.
Andrew, did you want to respond to that? Disappeared. Might be down to you, Mark. Is everybody frozen? Is it just me?
No, I haven't frozen, John. Sorry, I was just I was caught elsewhere. Could you just repeat the question?
Well, there are a number of points really about our response to managing the quality of practice. That we've got some practices in Croydon that are managed by operos, and given the publicity in the news recently, John highlighted a number of issues about the physician's assistants and the quality of care, and how we're getting assurance that our practices are not in that.
So I think there's
Nicola
things,
want to
really.
add. Nicola, do you want to talk about that instead?
Yeah, might I save you from this? So John, I think it's not even just that. It's far more than just this. So we've got a whole range of new additional roles, a workforce in general practice that are adding, enormous value potentially, but it's really still very new, and the pathways are still being worked up in PCNs. Physicians associates are just one of those, and actually one of the more longer standing roles came before the ARS really. So we've got we've got paramedics, we've got pharmacists, clinical pharmacists, we've got mental health workers, we've got care coordinators, first contact physios, a whole range of other people who are taking responsibility for managing patients. And it should be done in a way that the pathways are all agreed, that they get appropriate clinical supervision, that the arrangements in practices monitor the quality of care, and that needs to be in place. But this is still quite new. So in a way it's a helpful flag for us to make sure that now that our workforce has expanded significantly, I think we do need to, in South West London, take a look at this and manage it. Some of it will come through CQC reports, but we don't want to find out through that. We want to be proactive about helping PCNs to get these things in place. So I think we should, as a primary care team, undertake to look at that. And Andy, but he's not on the call at the moment, I think he had to go, but I think it's something that we do need to understand what the arrangements are in each place, and get some help and support for people to do this, because this is quite difficult new territory. But I think it's a point really well made actually, so thank you.
Mark, did you want to add anything in terms of the
PR
risks that are around?
I think there's a couple of things. I think there is that each borough will have primary care quality forums, which will feed into the primary care ops group, so that is a forum where we will pick up quality issues. Quality is across a number of domains, isn't it? It's the KPIs, it's the CQC reports, it's workforce returns, and actually it will be down to the borough teams, along with Andy's South West London support, to really dig in and dig down into each practice. I think when we're talking about the operas, Panorama programme, well, actually, that raises a number of issues that we need to locally look into, doesn't it? So without kind of jumping the gun, it's just whenever we do need to look at some of the claims and assure ourselves at a South West London level, we are happy with those practices and how they're performing. Aisha, is that a fair enough comment? Yeah.
John, are you happy with that?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I react positively to Nicola's point about physician's assistants, which have been around a long time. Although I'm going to confess, I had to go and look them up this morning and just find out a bit more about them. They have been around a long time, and of course they're part of the general changes to the way in which primary care is managed now. And you know, the latest thing now is on the media today about the role of pharmacy in the pharmacists rather in relation to possible cancer referrals and stuff. So those things are changing, and it's also good for Mark to suggest that the ICS, I guess, will have to perhaps have some specific actions in relation to that programme in South West London. So that's been helpful. Thank you.
Okay, fine. Any other business? Nicola?
May I do the last one if nobody else has any?
Yes.
Susan, I'd like to say thank you to you for your management and chairing of this committee for quite a long time now. I think you've been calm and sturdy and steady, and I've really appreciated the way that you've managed some pretty complex issues and helped us all to contribute. So yeah, thank you very much for the work you've done. It's really been appreciated.
It's been a joy, as they say. Mark.
And I suppose just on that same theme, I would just like to thank John, Bruno, Aisha on the call, because this is the final Primary Care Commissioning Committee. Lend my support to thanking Susan, but just thank you to everyone. I've always enjoyed the Primary Care Commissioning Committee, and yes, we wish everyone luck in the future, and no doubt we will see you in a different guise as well.
Okay. Andrew, you want the last word?
I've no idea what I missed. I'm the director on call, so I just had an urgent call.
You missed a very important item, but there we go.
Just had people saying you were wanting to talk about something, and I said I've got no idea what it is, so I apologise. But thank you very much, Susan, and others.
Well, thank you all, everybody. And some of you I will see in, shall we say, 10 minutes to start part 2. So good to see you all, and some I'll see at the governing body meeting as well. So all the best.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Bye-bye.